to the collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. Very excited. We got Steve rejoining us. Seb is back. JP is with us here. It's going to be fantastic. Now, while we get all the introductions done, make sure you like the show, hit the subscribe button, do the notification bell, do all that good stuff so you get your email whenever we go live, which is, of course, every day. Now, if you have any thoughts or questions during the show, by all means, put them in the comment section so that we can engage them and talk about them and discuss them from there. Let's go around the table, though, before we get too deep into the convo, and tell me who you are, where you come from, all that stuff. JP, I'm going to start with you. Hit it. Oh, and
my name's Johnny Payne. Here in Scotland, just in Edinburgh at the moment, and have been here all my life as a coach. 20 odd years coaching, a lot of experience coaching military operatives, with a background in the military myself, and a self-protection instructor, I suppose. So, jack of all trades, master of none.
I like it. Steve, you want to give us a little rundown on yourself as well, and then Seb will come to you, and then we'll go from there.
I did 6 years in the U.S. military, and then 24 years in law enforcement, in SWAT 19. So through the military and my law enforcement career, being an instructor and a trainer, and then now I've raised my own daughters from 7 to 9 as far as in their specific sport of CrossFit, and I coach them in CrossFit, and I also coach on football teams and other sports teams for mental skills.
Outstanding. Seb, I know you've been here a lot, but you want to give us a rundown?
Pretty much those two things combined, except 21 years for me, and I coach just a little bit better than Steve. That's it. Yeah, so everybody knows me, but yeah, I spent time in the military 3 years, and then I was 20 years with law enforcement, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, 12 years on full-time SWAT. I was a team leader and sergeant major for the division here in British Columbia. I spent most of my coaching time on firearms range, in fitness rooms, and a variety of combatives settings, and this is where the bulk of my initial coaching was from. Then there was the addition of the West Side barbell this and the CrossFit this and that. So I spent years having 2 to 3 gyms where I pumped out a bunch of athletes, over the years, some that made it to CrossFit Games and some that didn't, lots that didn't. But yeah, that's about it for me. Now I do some life coaching, so to speak.
Outstanding. Well, so we have our fantastic panel, and I mean, Shaun, I think your history goes without saying, but would you like to give us a little rundown?
It's mostly boring, but I've been coaching most of my life, which is for a few years.
Just 1 or 2.
59.
So today is Ask the Coach Day 2 of Coaches Week. We got some really fantastic questions from the interwebs, from people sending in their questions. Before we get into those, any thoughts or anything before we get started? No, everybody good? All right, let's dive right into it. So first question is up, comes from our friend Corey, and here we go.
Hey, coaches of the collective. Just playing a little hooky from work here. Shh, don't tell anybody. Question for you. Have you noticed in your time coaching or being coached if there's been a change in the culture of coaching itself? I know in my time of training people and supervising people, the culture of that has changed dramatically. Some would say for the worse, some would say for the better, but I know that we're being held to a higher standard that maybe perhaps before was not adhered to or not expected. But has there been a change in the culture of coaching in what you've been involved in? And if so, how has it changed? And is it to the better? Is it to the worse? Or has it made no difference whatsoever? Thanks.
That was a very good question. So I'm going to start with Shaun right off the bat, and then I'm going to work my way down.
Oh boy. So I'm going to start us off with a bit of a spicy one. My apologies up front. And I hope that you guys can pull the fragments that I'm about to explode. I hope you can pull them all back together so that we're all one big happy family by the end of this. Yeah, I do have an opinion on this. In fact, funnily enough, it's coincidental that I just came out of my live IG chat where I was speaking specifically about this. And here's what I've seen. So I've been coaching a long time, and I remember a time when it was hard to get a coach, where it was damn near impossible to get a coach. They were as rare as hen's teeth for the common man, for the lay person, as it were. And therefore, if you did bump into a coach, you were either going to be paying a whole lot of money to handwrite letters and mail them to them and get a handwritten email or envelope response back, or you were dealing with the guy in your neighborhood who was volunteering to look after the baseball team, and he had zero coaching experience. He had zero coaching education. He had zero coaching connection with any other coaches. Just a volunteer. So you either wrote a letter and mailed it, or you hung out with your local didn't know how to coach guy and tried to figure out how to coach. That's how I started to understand coaching out on the regular streets, as it were. But since then, coaching has become way more available to the common man, to the lay person. In fact, there was a time in history, which is relevant to what I'm talking about, history, where I think that coaching had reached its peak of good coaching. And then we jumped the shark. Then coaching became so readily available that everyone in your neighborhood is now a coach. In fact, they'll coach you how to be a coach, even though they just took the coaching course on the weekend that lasted a weekend. And now you've got everyone who's positioning themselves as a coach, and now they're a coach's coach's coach. It depends on how inception you want to go on this coaching situation that we're all facing right now, where I feel like coaching built itself up to where it needed to be, and then it just kept on building where we don't need to be, where it is so readily available by people who are so unqualified to coach that I got to call it out. Now, this panel obviously doesn't fit into that categorization. And I'm not saying that to be a good coach, you've got to have all the certificates. And I'm not saying that you've got to have 1,000,000 years worth of experience. But what I am going to say is you cannot be a coach if the only coaching you understand is through an online multiple choice questionnaire that took you half an hour to get the coaching certificate. I got a huge problem with it. And so I think that coaching has changed significantly, and I think that at one time it was good, and now it's for the worse to some degree.
Bam. All right.
Break out the crazy glue.
We can end the show. Here we go. Outstanding. I just want to hit on this real quick before we get too deep. Winterstorm, good morning. Winterstorm is actually the guy that asked the question, so we're answering him directly. Here we go. JP, how about yourself? What do you think?
Yeah, I can't agree more with Shaun in actual fact, but I think, so as I'm not expanding on his point, I think something that came to mind when the question was asked was this suggests you're making a very negative point, Shaun, but I was going to say in a more positive sense, forgive me for that. Something that I've noticed over the years, over maybe, I think probably with the emergence of Garmin's and Apple's and all these kind of brands that a lot of negative connotation comes with, the accessibility to data has risen enough so that from a performance perspective, if used right, and I think this speaks to your point a little bit, if used right, the opportunity to use data well has been a huge shift change. So I think that where we had to use, and some of this can be negative as well, I suppose, from a certain perspective, where we had to use intuition and we had to kind of rely on athlete feedback more so. Now we can kind of use a little bit of data and find out what an athlete's doing, how an athlete's performing, etc., without their feedback. Now, the problem there lies in that these same coaches that Shaun's talking about then rely exclusively on that data and don't know how to coach people anymore. They actually become kind of data entry clerks, and we have a problem there. So I think it's a double-edged sword, obviously, but something we use particularly, I think, well, is the opportunity to use data, and then use that data to kind of reflect the athlete's perception as well. So if I've got the numbers and the metrics, and then I can ask the question, how did you feel? And then I can kind of work with that feeling and the athlete's interpretation of things. I can use both to create a very good picture of the athlete. So the emergence of data and these data platforms, if used intelligently, has been a big step change that I think has been useful. I mean, we could, there's probably about 8 or 9 different things I can say about coaching. One of which makes us all seem like old men is that it's easy to say it wasn't like it used to be. It isn't like it used to be back in my day and all that kind of stuff. And I'm inclined to think that that's not just a curmudgeonly attitude. I do think that there has been a lot lost, and something in what Shaun was saying really rung true with me there, is that although I'm arguing a little bit for the positivity of data, I think interacting intelligently with athletes, the ability to learn over and over by that interaction and to learn how to be a coach by interacting with athletes has been taken away a little bit because of this accessibility to the internet, to as you say, online courses, to 5-minute kind of instructionals, and everybody thinks they're an expert. So the whole thing can be cut up in very many different ways. I think where there's a negative, we can also probably find a positive.
Absolutely. I just have to say I love the word curmudgeonry. That was fantastic.
Because I'm called curmudgeonly quite often.
So I am definitely curmudgeonly on this subject. And to JP's point, I got to jump in and say that you're right. I do have a strong position on this, and it is somewhat negative because I see it as a negative phenomenon that is starting to kind of become normalized. In fact, there's hardly any pushback on it anymore. In fact, people are pursuing it to some degree. This quick fix coaching. I'm a coach now. So to your point, JP, and I didn't think it was important to say, but I learned how to coach long before data was a thing. The military taught me how to coach. This taught me how to coach. That taught me how to coach. When I finally started using data as a coach, a high performance race coach for 15 years, every single day, every single athlete that I worked with or worked for me or I worked for them, every single day they were responsible to send me their data wattage. I've analyzed over 100,000 data files, wattage files, the gold standard of performance, and along with HR and all of the other metrics. And there is a case to be made for data. There is a case to be made for intuition. But the biggest case to be made is combining those two things into a coach. So I got lucky. I learned how to coach before Training Peaks was a platform. When Training Peaks was invented, I was one of the early adopters of it. And I'm a huge fan of data. Huge. Everything. If I could track everything in my life as a data point, I would. I track as much as I can, to include my sleep. And so data is important, but mostly your point is important. That is being a good coach before you get immersed in the data.
Yes, right.
Absolutely.
I agree with you. Training Peaks is a great example of where that became really accessible. And actually, kind of the way they present, I still use Training Peaks, and the way they present it and the way they use it, it's very easy to use as well. So it makes that side of the job quite simple in a certain sense, if you know what you're looking for, which I guess speaks to your point again. But as you say, you have to learn that late, and I think this is what's missed. I think if you heavily rely on the mathematics and the data and all the rest of it as you enter into this, and you think it's driven simply by that, then you've missed the entire human being. And that's what's been lost, and I think that's what you're describing well, is that the human interaction, the human element, and actually learning to be a coach, which should take years and years and years. I mean, none of us, I'm sure, will claim to have figured it out either. You know, it's still a work in progress. And as you say, the sadness is obvious when you see people claiming to be a coach after a week ago they weren't one. You know, well, how did that happen?
They took a course from Sigma International. It takes the whole weekend. You know, it's good times. Steve, what are your thoughts on the matter?
I think culture will always change, and no matter what we're doing, there's an evolution of culture that changes and stuff. For me, I don't get sucked into the behavioral and the traits that are going on, because some of those are for individuals that are into themselves, selling themselves nowadays on Instagram and TikTok and whatnot. But I look at what you guys talked about, data, as far as factual, evidence-based stuff that's giving us more information on how to do things more correctly or how to do them more efficiently. And when we use that from a vetted, trusted source, you apply it to your athlete or you apply it to whoever you're working with. So those things will they will change. what we did in the 30s and 40s and 50s of weightlifting is not what we're doing now. They're similar lifts, but how we elicit certain muscle groups to lift that weight now and how to move the barbell now is much different from back then. And so that's that factual, that culture that's changing of more evidence-based, more data that's useful to what you're using for your athlete. And so nowadays with what everyone here has been talking about is the explosion of coaches online. I've been forced when I travel, I work with some clients via text or the internet, and it's just not the same. It's not the same at all. And so you can reference material that they send you, but when you're trying to interact with them on an emotional, personal level, which some of them need, it's extremely hard. So it does help because I could be somewhere in the world and I can be reaching out to somebody using technology to still connect with them. And it's still a plus. It's just not the same. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Seb, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, all super valid points. I'm going to hit it from a bit of a different angle. And I mean, the dehumanization of coaching is a big problem with the online platform, as was alluded to by everybody. And I think that we also have a generation that spends most of their human interaction on their phones and very little in person. And that can cause issues as well when it comes down to, realizing what is actually occurring, whereas what's being produced in front of you as a symptom is linked to something that's completely unrelated. But you're not going to be able to make those segues if you don't have that emotional intelligence, if you don't have that ability to engage that way. So definitely, as far as tools are concerned, I really like the tools, as it was mentioned again. But I would make a correlation with, say, the firearms world, which we can all relate with. And imagine having, your people come through a training program and you're giving them all the bells and whistle on that firearms of theirs with all their lasers and all their optics and friggin' this and that and the other thing. Any of those things go off and the person fundamentally is flawed. Whereas if you teach them fundamental, shooting on iron sights, the fundamentals of the body positions and all those things that we all know about, then you worry less if something happens and the kit is faulty or there is a breakdown of whatever. At least the breakdown is not fundamentally catastrophic, so to speak. So I really like the tools, but we need to use them. We need to use them wisely, as already been mentioned a bunch of times. Now, also, there has been a pretty substantial shift, a generational shift, I will call it, and there is a clash of generations when it comes to coaching. There's no question that that's the case, as it's been brought up a couple times. But also, there are certainly certain things that we could have done better back then that we didn't, and I will take, for example, let's take the tier 1 world, for example, and even it's no different in the law enforcement world, but having the old, autocratic, I'm going to drive into you as hard as possibly can with no rhyme or reason and no real justification that takes that whatever test or task that I'm asking you to do and correlate it directly to the duties you're going to be asked to perform. And so everything was just much more of a gut check, or everything was much more of a, you don't question authority, you don't get a justification as to why you're doing certain things. And the problem with that type of approach is that if the person is right, you're good to go. If the person is wrong, you're not so good to go, but you also don't know what you didn't do correctly, because now you're acting upon somebody else's words. Whereas what I do feel is like if you're able to provide the athletes with, and whoever you're coaching in whatever field of endeavor, with enough fundamental know-how and fundamental understanding of what it is that they're being coached through, then if something happens to you, or if the relationship, somehow you guys part ways, or if they decide to go somewhere else, they can take that knowledge with them, and they have it, provided that they've spent the time, acquiring and learning it and soaking it in, instead of being in the passenger side of a car and never knowing what the place you drove to 10 times because you never paid attention. But if you're a part of the process and you're engaged in the process, I feel like some of the techniques that we're using now, which are more adult learning styles, are more conducive to the person understanding why they're doing what they're doing and to be able to replicate that and form trends. And so there's definitely good and bad. I too get a little annoyed, so to speak, at the online world, but I also have to look at it. Why am I getting annoyed? Well, because I'm out there and now somebody else is. And so I have to be careful that my reaction isn't a negative reaction on account of I feel threatened by the fact that there's more, like if I stick to the game plan and do what I can do and bring the tools that I bring that are tried and tested, do I have to worry about the charlatans and the people that are going to get exposed? Probably not. And so, anyways, I'll leave it at that. That's kind of where I'm at with that.
I can't help it. I can't help it. I can't do hallway passes. I just can't. And so Seb I agree with all of Seb's points. And why should I even concern myself with some folio who's dragging a bunch of veterans down into a dark space because they can't coach themselves out of their own coaching space. They can't coach themselves. How on earth can they coach anyone else? So I just don't give hallway passes. So I'll call it out all day, every day. And I know that everyone deserves the right to be able to live their life the way that they want. But the moment that their life starts negatively impacting other lives and they are unaware that they're negatively impacting someone, I'm going to let them know. And so I'll call myself out as an example. I said that I've got well over 100,000 data file analysis under my belt from athletes all around the world. It probably took me 10,000 files until I started to be able to read the matrix of data analysis. And so, JP, since you've played around with Training Peaks, you understand FTP, CT, blah, 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 all of the acronyms. You know all of the Training Peaks acronyms. You know all of the graphs, the charts, the this, the that. And it's nice. There's lots of colors in there. It looks super sexy. It's got really cool acronyms. It's really fun. You can treat it like a James Bond game if you want when you're first starting off, and it looks like something that just got delivered from outer space on day one. And you can fascinate yourselves with the data. You can fascinate yourselves with the charts. Any athlete who plays with Training Peaks can really kind of engage in that process and start thinking after a week, oh, I get it. I understand what's going on here right now. I see how I'm going to be better by tomorrow. You don't. It takes months and months and months and months just to start understanding that a pattern is forming. And for me to start forming patterns on the patterns of other athletes, it probably took 10,000 files for me to start reading deeper into that data matrix. It's easy to see the surface level stuff. Almost anyone can do that. But to see what is actually going on inside of a person through data is not that easy if you're trying to do it really well. So again, probably 10,000 files. By about 50,000 files, I was feeling confident. Now I feel like I could probably teach someone how to properly analyze files as a coach. And therefore, to my next point, it's our job to raise coaches as a coach. And that's what I did with Julie Kelly, who was a coach on yesterday's podcast as one of the coaches for the Q&A. 10 years I worked with her, and through 10 years I taught her how to read the matrix of the data stream within Training Peaks, which she now does since over a year ago when she took over my job, when I said I'm stopping coaching to go do podcasting. And so we've got to understand our limitations. We've got to understand that we're not just coaching the person in front of us, but we're coaching that person to then go coach others, as it were.
It's an interesting thought pattern. You're kind of, at least correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about the theory versus experience, right? And being able to not only just know the data, but also be able to understand the data.
Well, one plays off of the other. I mean, you've got to have the experience to see the data in a different way, and then you've got to look at the data in a different way to then gain new experiences out of it. You've got to go pressure test what you see in the data, and then you've got to accept the pressure test that you just put yourself through to then re-understand the data in a different vector. It's a constant game of daily understanding the nuance of the moment. I mean, if coaching was as simple as a 48-hour course and you never have to do another thing, everyone would be a coach.
That's a good point. JP, you got any thoughts on that?
Just to agree, it's entirely correct the way I described that. It's like one of those magic pictures. Do you remember those where you look at them and it makes no fucking sense, and then you look at it for a long time and go cross-eyed a bit, and then all of a sudden it's a unicorn shitting on the moon or something. Oh, that's what it is.
That's what it was.
That's what you're describing. Those 10,000 hours or those 10,000
That's right.
data points is that's just a unicorn, one hoof, and you're like, wow, it looks like an animal. So that's exactly it, isn't it? And the other part of that, which I know that you spoke to earlier on, Shaun, is that once you understand all that, you could sit for months and months in front of that computer screen and understand it and have these kind of, what does that spit out? What does it spit out? A faster athlete? Does it spit out, is the speed getting better? Is the recovery getting better? Are the numbers going in the right direction? Unless you interact with that athlete, unless you understand the athlete themselves. And sometimes it's a funny one to argue, but I think unless you know what some of that stuff feels like, hopefully all of that stuff feels like, it's still just data. It's still just numbers. It's still just fancy graphs. And without having that opportunity, and this is what every one of us has spoken a little bit about the effects of online coaching versus real life coaching. And there's something to be gained from online coaching for sure, but without having that direct experience of seeing an athlete move, then the numbers mean nothing, I think, and that's been lost a lot, because the more we immerse ourselves, as Seb said, in our phones and the computer and training peaks and all the rest of it, the more we disconnect with the human element, which is seeing people make shapes, and actually, understanding what those shapes mean and whether we can adapt and change them, get them to understand that, and numbers and figures, and well, you need 13% more wattage over the next fucking XYZ. Doesn't mean anything to anybody unless you tell them what it means, and then you could have told them anything, doesn't it? So again, it has to be practiced, and has to be you have to see the outcome, don't you? So again, that's just human interaction, which has been lost.
So Steve had said something, and I wanted to be able to raise that.
Before you do,
What
Shaun,
I know you can type it, buddy. So what I wanted to say was, Steve had mentioned that it's sometimes, it's hard to communicate with another person when you're traveling if they've never had a coach, or maybe you're their coach and they're long distance, and if you have never done a handshake with them, sometimes it's harder to coach that person than if they're standing in front of you on a regular basis. Well, this panel is lucky, because we're all old enough that we learned how to communicate with human beings before the digital world came along. I mean, I was taught to communicate before Training Peaks existed. And so I've said it in the past, I've got athletes in other countries that I've never met that I've coached for 10 years, and in high performance racing. And I might know them better than their wife knows them. And that's because I learned how to communicate long before data was the means to manage an athlete. So as older, curmudgeonly perhaps, individuals who've come up through the game of learning how to communicate well in small teams, big teams, all kinds of things. We know how to communicate well. So taking that ability to communicate, which a younger generation doesn't necessarily do as well, we have a real advantage as curmudgeonly coaches to be able to communicate digitally with people that we will never meet, perhaps.
Yeah. Steve, you got any thoughts on that?
No, all true. I mean, you draw on all your based experience on how to communicate with people prior to the digital world coming in effect, and then it helps you communicate as a better communicator. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I do have another question lined up. Are there any other thoughts on coaching culture, or how we?
Just one quick thing for me, just to clarify some of my earlier points. Right before Shaun reminded me that some people definitely shouldn't have a hall pass, and those people are generally called life coaches. That's one of my biggest contentions. So there is various areas where people might be coaching. They might be suited for coaching in certain areas. The issue of the propensity for people now to be life coaches, and a variety of those different individuals are consistently seeking help with their own lives, through a variety of people that we all know. And it's interesting, if you don't have things sorted out, don't start coaching others, because that has catastrophic consequences. So there's no hall pass on that. Whereas I'd be more lenient with people that are learning to coach for physical fitness or whatever the case may be. So just a little clarification for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts on any of that before we move on? Very good. Okay, cool. Let's jump into the next question. Now, this one is a bit specific in terms of hunting, but there is an underlying question that it implies that I think we'll all be able to gather from. So let's.
Hi, I'm Angela, and here's my question for the coaches. 6 years ago, I took on the task of learning how to hunt big game, and I've spent a lot of time doing all of the certification, a lot of online learning and workshops, mainly through Eat Wild, which is a program out of Vancouver specifically designed for new hunters with no family connections or background. My question to any of the coaches who hunt or have a background in hunting is, how do you get to that step of actually finding a mentor that will take you out in the field? So far, this has been a really tough egg for me to crack, and it almost seems like a private magical club that's really difficult to get into. And I hate using the labels, but especially for a female who doesn't have any family connections to hunting. I'd appreciate your feedback. And of course, if any of you are willing to take on an apprentice hunter, let me know. Thank you.
So, Steve, I'm going to put you on the hot seat first. What do you think?
I'm trying to figure out if she's talking about like she wants to be a guide, or is she hunting for herself? Do you know?
She is hunting for herself, yeah.
Oh, well, the cool thing about it nowadays is there's way more female hunters. My daughters hunt, but this goes with anything. I think if you stay in that skill set field, and the more you dive around in it, the more you're in it, the more contacts that you make. And it's a natural byproduct of being in that field for so long. You're going to meet someone somewhere that are willing to take on the task of what you're asking for. So, I think just connections, the people that she knows, the people she gets to know, someone's going to know somebody somewhere. And again, there's a lot of females that go out and hunters. There's a lot of females I know in the US that go out and do hunting, and they also do guide hunts, and people go to them as clients. So knowledge is gained by staying in the specific skill set for a very long time. And you just naturally make contacts there.
Like that. JP, what do you think?
I was kind of hoping to bow out of this to some degree, because I don't hunt and don't have access to that opportunity. But I would kind of echo, my thoughts were off the top of it, exactly what Steve said, is that my guess, and anybody who knows more than me, please, interject, but my guess is that there will be forums. She mentioned the forum Eat Wild, I think she said. There'll be other forums, and there's likely to be groups. Maybe you'd have to travel to find it. There's likely to be groups where if there's a barrier to entry, perhaps at least in her mind, being female, there'll be groups of females who go out together and kind of create that network. I imagine, really, I'm just saying what Steve said, is that you're going to have to stay invested, you're going to have to stay in there, and you're going to have to kind of work that room and network enough until you make that one connection who triggers the next connection and all the rest of it. I don't think, unless I missed it, that we got any indication quite how long the lady had been in that group or in that world, and how long she'd been hoping to make those connections. Maybe it's just a matter of more time, but I'll bow out to most degree here, because I don't know much about hunting beyond that.
Right.
Again, keep working, I think, is probably the best advice I can give.
So, Seb, what do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely a whole bunch of groups. I know in the U.S. it's very, very common. One of those, the more popular one, is called Wildlife Women, I think, or some to that effect. Angela, if you watch this, just go back and do some Googling, do some research about hunting specifically for women and women groups, and because they're out there, and the same groups will sometimes tie that into firearms training and have some firearms training day and all kinds of different communities going on out there. Now in Canada, it may or may not be different, and maybe you just have to go to Washington, or maybe you just have to cross into Montana from where you are right now in the interior, or whatever the case may be. So, and what is that? Well, that's called exploring, and that's called having fun with life. So, you know, it doesn't have to necessarily come to you. And I'm taking this out of the Shaun Taylor book, by the way. It's a page out of the Shaun Taylor book.
Adventure.
Make it fun. And so also just to wrap this up a bit, again, just like Johnny Payne, unless we're hunting humans, I'm pretty useless. But what I will say is Travis Bader would be a great resource to tap into. So Angela, if you listen to this, go on the Silver Core website and go ahead and touch base with Travis, and I'm sure he'll be able to help you find some like-minded people that can help you develop.
Absolutely. Sean, what do you think?
Dang, Seb stole my answer. I was going to go with the Travis Bader. But I got another answer. It's my plan B. Always have a plan B, you know. So this summer, I bumped into a guy who'd been following me for a little while on Instagram. He goes by the call sign of Bearded Honey Badger. Mm-hmm. And so I hung out with him on the drop zone this summer at Operation Pegasus Jump, jumping out of perfectly good airplanes. And he's a veteran himself. And what he does is he offers tours. He guides with other veterans. And if I understand things correctly, he's a volunteer. It's all free. He goes hunting anyway. And since he's going hunting, he organizes taking some veterans out there for their first time or second time or whatever the case is to introduce them to the sport. He loves meeting new people. He loves, much like any good coach, I think, loves introducing someone into something that they're passionate about. I came out not crusty. I came out hard at the onset of this podcast on what I think is a detraction within the coaching industry. But I love the coaching industry, man. I love coaches that are passionate about increasing other people's passions. And so on hunting, I'm not a big hunter myself, but Bearded Honey Badger on Instagram will either connect you with the right people, since, as I understand it, they are now spreading across Canada in various locations and becoming a thing. So reach out to him and see if he's got any tips for you.
Yeah, that's a great example. I think he works with the Veteran Hunter, I believe, and that whole program. They are veterans themselves that hunt, that can help, that take a former. I actually went with one up in out in Edson going for bear, which was a great little trip, but absolutely do it. Now, I had read into this question a little bit more in terms of entering into any new environment where you have absolutely zero previous experience and you have no family, you have nothing. It's just all of a sudden you're going to try and dive into a brand new thing. And I was just wondering what your guys' thoughts on how to enter into that with the right mindset or the right will state. I don't know how to describe it really, but whenever you're taking on a new task or a new skill or a new thing, what are you guys' thoughts on how to do that well? Seb, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Sure. Well, first of all, just be at peace with the fact that most of the work is going to come from you. Nobody in that community owes you anything. But also, it's your responsibility to be educated on what it is that you are getting into. So that means researching, that means, reading, watching videos, and now the information is everywhere. So it's not like, literally, if somebody doesn't know something about something and they really haven't tried to find it, because the answer is out there somewhere in the intrawebs. And so spending the time familiarizing yourself with the terminology, with some of the, and understanding that this is a journey. Like it isn't, everybody wants that instant gratification where, I'm not a hunter and next week I want to be a hunter. By next week, I'm gonna get this hunting thing figured out. Yeah, hunters have been hunting their entire life and they're learning every time they go on a hunt. And so, but having the right mindset, which is being coachable, not only asking for help, but applying the whatever is being given as help to help you develop, is no different in any field. If you're uncoachable, I don't care how much coaching you get, you're not going to thrive in whatever field of endeavor you're embarking on. And so enter with an open mind, enter with an interest, and start researching, start forming the foundation of your base knowledge in relation to whatever it is that you're taking on. Then start looking around the community and see who's who in the zoo, who has, influence in the community, who has programs in the community and research that piece, and then get in touch with the right person and have that conversation while you are being receptive and you're applying certain things. When people are responding to you, generally speaking, what they should do is to give you a bit more work to do, not to take the work away from you. You should be getting work from them. And so if I reach into somebody to pick their brain and I'm being spoon-fed the answers, it's probably not right. It's probably not right, and it's going to push me somewhere where I don't want to be. I want to do the work, so that's important. That's an important piece. Once you have that mindset stuff all sorted out, it's just like anything else. It's a skill, and it takes time. There is no quick fixes. But what there is paths that are more efficient than others. And so once you start researching and dabbling around and reading and talking to people, you will find out what those paths are. And when you are being given the answers, instead of shopping for another answer that suits your needs better, try to see if you can line that up so that you can make whatever it is that you should do happen.
Absolutely. Steve, any thoughts?
I think Seb hit it all, to be honest with you. That's pretty much what I was going to say is you have an interest or a like to do something, research everything you can, and just hit the gas and go towards it and look for the path that's going to be more efficient than, like Seb said it perfectly. I mean, there's no complexity to this. It's very simple on how to approach something that you want. You will do whatever it takes to get there, and communicating with other people in the field to put you on the right path. So,
yeah, absolutely. JP, any thoughts?
Steve had been saying, I'd also say that it's worth, before you enter into something new, embracing the idea that you're going to fucking suck at it. It's going to be awful. And
you got to watch that language there, JP.
oh, sorry. Apologies. I'm Scottish. We should have a little waiver at the beginning saying this guy's Scottish. Oh, sorry. Yeah, embrace that. Embrace the suck, I suppose. Every time you enter into something new, especially if there's skill involved, like skill, you're gonna be bad at it. You're not gonna be good at it at all, and that's the first sort of indication of your will, of your passion, is whether or not you hang around after that first opportunity to be shown just how bad you are. I see, Shaun wearing the BJJ t-shirt, and BJJ, something I think we're all familiar with, is a great example of it. Is the first time you turn up, not only are you going to be, well, it depends on the class, but certainly you're going to feel powerless. You're going to feel like you don't know what the hell's going on, but that's going to last for a good few months, and only after about 6 months, people go, oh, I feel like I know what I should be doing here. Whether they can do it well or not, they've only just got what they're even there for, And whilst BJJ is a good vehicle to describe that, I think it applies to everything. Once you dive in, you're going to start floundering and flapping around, and it's going to be uncomfortable. And there's an indication of your passion. But I think before you get in, it's worth noting that you're going to be scared. That kind of overwhelming fear that we all have entering into something is natural and should be embraced. And I think something I bang on about quite a lot is that's where the growth is. So as long as if you feel nervous, if you feel frightened, and you think you get to the door of the club or whatever it is that you're doing, or in Angela's case, maybe out into the field and packing her gear for the hunt, and thinks, you know what, maybe I'll give it a miss today because I just feel like a neophyte and I don't really know what I'm doing, then that's when you should really step forward hard. And I'm always keen to kind of address that with people is, the point of giving up presents itself over and over and over again. And mostly almost always it's because of fear. And usually it's because of a lack of understanding of what's really going on, and the only way to get past that is exposure. So just keep going. Same as we said earlier on with Angela, dig in, keep working. Eventually these things will reveal themselves, and eventually you'll see just how far you've come. So it's a fun journey to watch with people, especially on the mat.
Absolutely. Shaun, any thoughts on it? You're muted though.
Apologies. So something that came to mind on the individual who was asking the question. It really depends on what her learning style is, what kind of a coach is right for her. And so I think that that's something that everyone should consider throughout their lives. and from a very early age, start to understand how you best improve within an environment. I'll take my oldest son as an example. Funnily enough, this Taiwan BJJ t-shirt I just got yesterday from 5 years ago because my son had it stashed in his closet, and he just gave it back to me before he went to university this week and said, "Oh, Dad, here you go." I was like, "That's my t-shirt from 5 years ago." Fucking hell. My oldest son been on the BJJ mats with me for 8 years, and as I was watching him come up through the system, of course, I wanted to coach him on the mats, but coach him in the sense of not be like his mega coach, but observe him as a coach to start understanding how he best worked on the mats, how he best learned on the mats, how he best interacted on the mats. And I knew this from teaching him other martial arts prior to BJJ, and I knew it through a bunch of other things. I kind of understood his style, but each environment has nuances. We'll call the BJJ environment versus the cycling environment. There's enough delta or delineation between those two that you should be able to observe differences in learning styles in different environments. And so my job as his dad / coach was to understand how my oldest son, Evan, best performed within that environment. And as it turns out, he didn't care to get a whole lot of coaching from his coaches, not me, but anyone who was coaching him. He just wanted to watch it once and then get on with it. He didn't need like triplicate explaining. He didn't need to, let's all show that another 10 times. He saw it once and then got on with the program. And I'm kind of like that myself. And so the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. So for all of the parents out there who are thinking, how does my kid learn best? Think about how you learn best. And then start observing your kids on the mats or whatever environment that they're in to see how they best learn. And by the way, that best learn way is not for the rest of their life. It will ebb and flow. So as a coach, it's my job to help that person understand how they best learn. And then it's my job, once they understand that, to move them around a little bit. Not in the perfect style of coaching, but adding an extra 10% onto their boundaries of coaching so that when they bounce off to another coaching environment, they have the slush factor, or they have enough external bandwidth beyond what they truly are to be able to evolve within a new coaching environment that they may or may not have the choice of being in. And so again, as coaches, we're supposed to figure out the person in front of us. We're supposed to deliver what's ideal for them. But I think it's also our job to make them a little bit more than what's perfect for their learning style.
Yeah. Now, any other thoughts on any of that? I got one more question that we can hit today, unless anybody's got any more thoughts on that. Are we good? Cool. All right, moving on. And speaking of Travis,
so I'm out hunting for
just
grouse
happens to be here.
with my son and my dog, and got some cell reception here, and got the call out from the collective for questions for next week's coaches. So my question would be, what is one mindset shift or perspective change that you've seen make a significant impact in your clients' lives, and how can people incorporate that into their own lives?
There we go. I think it's a simple question with a difficult, maybe a simple answer as well. But Shaun, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Well, it's a simple answer for me on a very complex question, but my simple answer covers, generally speaking, my entire thought on this matter. Start acting like a professional. Whenever an athlete would join me as a coach, within a matter of minutes, I'd be telling them, you ain't an amateur anymore, you're now a professional. Start acting like one. The only difference between an amateur and a professional in my world is your thought process. You can change that in a millisecond. So stop acting like an amateur, start acting like a professional. And what that does with the athlete or the individual who I'm coaching, it helps them understand that it ain't a hobby anymore. It ain't I'm not a volunteer asking you to, hey, show up if you can. What I'm telling you is I'm a professional coach with professional expectations, and I expect you to act professionally within my professional environment, and that's what's going to draw the best out of you. So for me, it's pretty simple. Act like a pro.
I like that. Seb? going to come to you next. What do you think? You're muted, buddy.
My apologies. Yeah, so for me, I would say the two main shackles that I see are victim mentality. Victim mentality being absolutely, you being in the passenger seat of the ride and somebody else being in complete control, and you're a victim of everything that happens in life, including your performances. Nothing's your fault, and there's no ownership over anything. And as soon as you can get rid of that and take control of absolutely everything within your sphere of control, and this is from a metaphorical standpoint, and you're gonna be able to act upon and sort of enact a plan that you had set forth for yourself, with the steps that you need to incrementally, or that you need to advance your case towards your goal in increment way. But no outside interference or outside influence is going to necessarily affect you as much as it will if you let it. And so this is one of the the biggest problems that we see almost everywhere, especially it's a generational problem, so it seems anyways now. And then I had another one here, partially written, a knowledge. Was I going on with this?
I don't know. Do you want me to come back to you?
Yeah, no, I forgot this one, but also watch for boxes. Just set yourselves in boxes and stay in them. It's one thing to be in jail, but it's another thing to be in jail with the keys in your pocket. And accessibility to an escape, and just choosing to stay there on account of this is where society has drawn boxes around some of the things that are possible or impossible. Those are some of the boxes that I put around myself with respect to performance, on account of I don't think I can do any better, or everybody else is better than me, or all the things that are interfering. So the piece about acknowledging the emotion ties right into this. It's essentially, emotions are meant to be acknowledged, so you understand why you're having a reaction to the certain circumstances that you're going through. But the day that you let them dictate what should and shouldn't, you're going to have some serious problems. So for me, I acknowledge the emotions, but then it's down to the process. What am I doing? And then it turns into more of a mathematical equation. How do I problem solve this? And that can apply to absolutely anything. So curb the victim mentality. Yes, it's cool to acknowledge your emotions, but don't let them drive the bus. And then watch for the boxes that you're self-imposing or that other people are imposing around you.
Yeah, absolutely. JP, what do you think?
Keep myself to some degree, but that's okay, I suppose. Fear, again, I think it's really important to have people understand how that feels and how it manifests. And once we talk to people about the fact that they're going to feel that nervous excitement, or they're going to how adrenaline feels when it's flowing, or how abject fear might feel, and expose them to that, there's a mindset and a shift in people's understanding of themselves, which I think echoes a little bit what Seb was saying as well, with the idea really of, to paraphrase to the degree of know thyself. You need to know, without leaning into those emotions and becoming kind of crippled by and controlled by them. You also need to understand those emotions and need to understand what your immediate instinctive reaction to things might be, how to manage that, and whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. To be able to talk to people and kind of normalize fear for them and say, you're going to feel this way, you're going to feel that way. Here are the kind of chemical things that are happening in your body. Here's the physicality of that. Maybe combat sports is a good example. I've worked with many fighters right up to elite level, and we've all seen the clips of Mike Tyson talking about how scared he is and all the rest of it. It's a good example, really, of people think that they can take things on, they can take new things on, and not experience that stuff, or perhaps they're not aware that they will experience that stuff, and then it become crippling. So I think it's really important that people understand their emotional reaction to things, and then, again, as Seb said, to then learn how to control that and to use it positively, because you're not going to take fear away, you're not going to take those emotional reactions away, but you can harness them really, really powerfully, in my opinion, and you can have them move things forward so much better. Another very brief one that we've been discussing here recently, a bit of a trite one in a certain sense, and something of a, alluding to people being on their phones all the time, something of a trite sort of hashtag moment is that I see people saying, no one cares, work harder. And I really like it. Because ultimately what we're saying with that, or what people are saying with that, or the way I've tried to own it, is that a good example was I came home having hit a deadlift PB, having the day before run, a daft amount of miles, 80 miles or something, and told my wife how excellent I was. And she said, well, that's nice, dear. We need to get dinner sorted. And I was like, oh, you ruined things for me. And a terrible emotional reaction to it, going back to that emotional stuff. And then I realized what a gift that was in actual fact. She still loved me. It made no difference to her whether I'd lifted the X amount of kilos off the floor or not. But what does make a difference to her is that I came home impassioned by it. And what makes a difference to me is that then, within that kind of scenario, what then made a difference to me is that then it became entirely mine. These kind of things, whilst we may talk about them and share those experiences with other people, the experience is entirely mine, which means I own it entirely, which means it's within my power to do whatever I want with it, So once I completely absorb that ownership and remove that extrinsic kind of motivation to a degree, then I feel like there's more to be achieved. And it's hard to tell people, like, yeah, I realize you're competing and I realize that you want to win this thing and all the rest of it, but it doesn't really matter because you're kind of taking things away from them in their own mind. But if you can take them through that philosophy, they'll say that if it matters to you deep down, then there's more there than you even thought in the first place, which maybe was a bit deeper than anybody wanted, but I believe in it entirely.
Absolutely. Steve, you want to round us off on this?
Kind of hasty path off of Shaun, just talking about being professional. When someone talks about wanting to do something, there's that theory piece that says they want to do it. When they start to develop the skills and they start to get coached to doing what they want to do, that mind shift that I look for is when their actions begin to show their intent. Their intent is there to do something, but their actions have got to back that up. So I place that into two, or I kind of pair it off to each other's theory versus action. Theory is the planning phase of you saying you want to do something. Action is you doing whatever it takes to gain that skill set, to be better at that skill set. And so that's when you start to act like a professional, taking ownership. And without saying a word, I want this and I want to be here. And that's what I look for.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts on any of that? We're getting a little short on time, so I'm just wondering if anybody has anything else to add to that. Okay, cool. Let's go down the line and get some final thoughts. Again, I just want to say thank you so much. It's been awesome. We made it through 3 questions today, so that's fantastic. We got some really good info, and we hit some really solid points. So I just want to say thanks to Steve, JP, Seb, Shaun. It's fantastic so far. Let's do some final thoughts. Seb, you want to start us off?
Sure. So I'll just quickly piggyback on JP's point about the seeking of external validation, which would be right in line with what I was talking about earlier, but right below victim mentality is the need for external validation. Squash this, all of it, and I mean that. And yes, I do have a social media, and it doesn't matter if it imploded today, it wouldn't be anything to me. I don't care. I stayed off social media until 2017 because I was busy doing work. But the external validation piece that everybody's after isn't the motivator that you need to get to where you want to go. Because as soon as the wheels hit the pavement, as Steve alluded to, you are going to start second and triple guessing absolutely everything about your will to do certain things. And if that little voice is not anchored in something solid, you're going nowhere with that pursuit. And so make sure that whatever validation you need comes from the inside.
Absolutely. Steve, final thoughts?
Yeah. I don't care what you do. This is what I tell every client and my own daughters. If you want it, prove it. And it's easy to quit, but the regret lasts forever. Don't quit.
Absolutely. JP, final thoughts? If you're with us, you might be frozen. stealing his neighbor's bandwidth. Shaun, you want to round us off?
Very Scottish of him. So I would say this, and it's kind of been said. I'm just going to use a different word, but I think it's identical to everyone else here. Passion. That's all I care about. Show up with some passion. If I'm your coach, you'll never walk into my coaching empire unless you've got passion. That's it. That's all. You could be a rank amateur or the mega world champion. Either way, you won't get through my door unless you've got passion. If you're the biggest name in the industry and you're passionless, move along. If you are a nobody and you've got a lot of passion, come on in. I can work with anyone who's got passion. I find it extremely difficult to work with someone who has a lack of passion for the thing that they're asking me to involve my life with. It's my time, my life. It's not about the money. It's about the minutes or hours or weeks or years that I'll give to a person based on one thing: their will to want to get better, their passion to become a better or more awesome human being. I'm all in when someone displays passion. I'm all out when they show up as a zombie. So I will never engage with anyone as a coach unless they are excited about becoming a more awesome human being.
Yeah, absolutely. I think JP's back. I think he's going to come sit. He had to turn his lights back on. JP, you want to give us some final thoughts?
Scottish as well. I haven't put money in the meter. That's an old school reference, isn't it? Yeah. I guess I've started out on a theme. I might as well finish on one, which is the theme of fear, and hopefully I'm not boring anybody too much with this yet. I think it's important to lean into that fear, and I think whatever you do, you're gonna feel it, so you might as well own it. A good friend of mine says, lean into the sharp edges, and I think that's where you're gonna find the passion that Shaun's talking about. That's where you're going to find that the moment Steve alluded to, that you're gonna want to prove it. That you're going to feel like this is something that you want. Is where that fear is found as well. And lots and lots of trite buzzwords and catchphrases. One of which being, in fact, the name of the book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And this same friend wrote another book which was called Fear, the Friend of Exceptional People. The theme being, if you can find that, you can recognize it, you can harness it, then there's a good argument to say that you can, without getting too hippy-dippy about it, you can manifest a hell of a lot more, let's say. So I think that's something I'm hopeful that people take away from any time that I'm here, is that, fear is your friend, and it's a powerful tool to use if used positively.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can't thank you all enough. This has been another fantastic day of Ask the Coach. I think we've hit a number of topics, and I'm very excited for the rest of the week. We got another 5 days of awesome conversation. So to all those people watching, thank you very much for joining us. Make sure you tune in for the rest of the week, because we're going to answer more of your questions, and we're all going to learn together. We're all going to build ourselves together, and we're all going to grow together. You can do that with us here on The Collective. We'll see you all tomorrow. Chimo.
Chimo.